This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. This is your host, Phil McKinney. We are here in Las Vegas for the annual Consumer Electronics Show. We have Tim Bajarin joining us again. I think this is, third year in a row now.
I think at least the third, yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing kind of the update. Tim is the founder and CEO of Creative Strategies, also the host of the Tech Pinions podcast, which is broadcast on the Innovators Network. So many of our listeners also are followers of you and Bob O'Donnell and Ben and crew over on your podcast. So day one of the show, I don't know about you, but I feel like my legs have already walked off. I mean, this gets, and actually, I don't know if you know, they're building the extension to the convention center across the road there, doubling the size.
Yes, I know.
And they're claiming that they'll fill it next year for CES. Both sides will be full. I'm like, how big can this show really? I mean, it is the show of the year globally.
Yeah, but to be fair, the reason they're actually doing it is, believe it or not, we're not the biggest show in Las Vegas.
Oh, we're not. That was always the claim by CES.
The cowboy show, the rodeo show, brings in 1.5 million during a 10-week run.
I've always wanted to come for. I'm a big rodeo fan. I've always wanted to come for the rodeo, but have never.
Yeah, but
that's like December, isn't it, or something? November.
I think so.
Yeah, something like that.
But it's weird because again, we are CES is the second largest technology show.
Okay. To
IFA in Germany.
Yeah, that's true.
Germany is about 400,000. We're about 170 this year, they think. But
was Comdex ever this big?
Yeah, not quite that high. Comdex hit the 100,000 mark about 93, I believe it was, 94.
Yeah, I used to do the Comdex show too.
I know.
That
were there.
That was crazy.
Oh,
that was crazy.
Yeah.
So, saw your tweet this morning, or one of your tweets, on the heated toilet seat. It actually is more of a meme of what you see here at the show. You get off kind of outside the main booth areas, and you kind of get into the edge area. You see some pretty interesting stuff.
Well, it's funny. I don't know if you saw the post I did for Forbes, but this is my 50th CES.
Yeah, this is my 25. Actually, after you wrote that post, I went back and counted how many times I've been there after I read your post.
And so I've watched the show develop over these, what is 50 show years, but for me it's about 30, because I also did multiple shows in Chicago, because they used to do this twice a year.
Oh, that's right. I forgot all about that.
So when you count all the ones that I've gone to, it's been 50. It's only been about 45, 43 years that I've actually been here, but then I did 8 or 9 Chicago shows. Anyway, in one sense, the show is very different. It's evolved beyond our imagination in these 50 plus years. But in one sense, it still holds true to its original roots, which is video and audio, right? So I just was on the show floor a little while ago looking at all of the new televisions that are out, right? Sunday night, I was at the Samsung event where they introduced the 292-inch 8K TV.
Yep, saw that in the booth this morning.
My God. Yeah, where in the world, I don't know where people put this unless they build their own theater room in the house.
Did you get up close to it?
Oh, yeah.
I got up close to the booth this morning. You could feel, there's actually that heat you're feeling coming off that display.
Well, you think about how much power is being used just to draw.
Yeah, not part of the green strategy.
No, not at all. But my point is, you've got tremendous amount of video here,
right,
which was in its original roots. And then you have the audio, even though it's been extracted and it's over at, I think, the Cosmopolitan or whatever, there's a giant audio section as usual. But because the term consumer electronics actually has a very different meaning than it did in the early days of CES, what you're seeing now is kind of a logical progression where you're thinking about, automobiles, being smart, right? Interestingly, we always had automobiles with the big boom boxes in it in CES for decades, right?
Well, that also NAB. That's also a big thing at the
Big thing
NAB
at
show
NAB,
every
yeah.
year.
But at this particular stage, they see the show as a way to come in and talk about what they're doing with cars to make them more consumer interesting, which includes a smart car, better video, actually integrating video into the car, and they're not really pushing the automated driving aspect yet here. That'll be bigger at the auto show next week or later this week, actually in Chicago, I believe.
Right. Well, in fact, as you and I were talking before we started the show, I was over with Wendell Weeks in the Corning booth this morning, and Corning is showing off all this new dash glass, auto glass work that's being done in current vehicles, but also where they're going to support turning the car basically into your new living room. When you think about where autonomous vehicles are going to go, what are you going to do if the car's driving itself? What do you do to be entertained or do stuff productive while you're in the car?
And for Corning, the automotive side of it has become a very big part.
Yeah.
I mean, they've always had Corning glass in cars for decades. But 2 or 3 years ago, they did a YouTube video called Day of Glass. It was extremely innovative, even 2-3 years ago, where they were looking at the role of glass with images and video and embedded in the actual glass itself. And so they're now trying to take that and shifting that over to where it's part of the screen.
Yep.
Some of the sensors that you may need for automated driving could be in the screen itself. And no, they're doing some exciting work. I mean, from Corning's standpoint, and I've watched them pretty closely over the last 5 years, they're doing some innovative stuff in automotive.
Well, it's interesting because if you take, and this is, my conversation with Wendell this morning, who's the chairman and CEO at Corning, and, Wendell's point he was making about, his glass in the automobiles and where automobiles are going, he says, look, take the top off of an autonomous vehicle. It's basically a cell phone with tires.
Yeah.
When you think about what is in it, right? So he says from that standpoint, it's going to be hard to differentiate
It's a big
in the guts of the vehicle. It's really going to be that design and that experience in the cabin of the vehicle that's going to differentiate one manufacturer from another.
Absolutely. And but at the same time, that's been kind of the case in the sense of the kind of leather you put in a car. I mean, customization.
Do you have Bose audio or
it's always there.
JBL or whatever?
It's just that when you quote unquote electrify the car,
right,
and use that in the context of adding smart and visual aspects to it, that's where you can actually do a lot of differentiation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and with Faraday, and you got Tesla, and you got all these guys here, even at the show, bringing out and launching or introducing the next generation of their vehicles. It's going to become an interesting battleground.
Oh, it'll be huge.
Here soon.
Yeah.
With even GM's got their autonomous vehicle company in San Francisco, and I'm drawing a complete blank on the name of it. Where they've moved everything out of Detroit and completely set it up as a separate team just to drive the autonomous vehicle work for General Motors.
BMW has done the same as
Ford did the same thing too, right down in Page Mill.
Yeah, Ford and Mercedes.
Right, so they're all kind of putting their...
Yeah, but let's be clear. The reason they did it is they needed the talent in Silicon Valley.
Right. Well, yeah,
there was a motivation.
Is true. But it's interesting because the guys who are, they are taking their Detroit guys and trying to mesh this because
together, yeah.
It's a little different building a device you fit in your pocket versus this thing having to be able to comply with Department of Transportation, crash safety requirements.
Well, it's gonna, again. But my bigger point is that, like I said, this is my 50th CES. CES has grown and expanded dramatically. Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of the Las Vegas Convention Center, we are one of their bigger shows. But you can see if they're going to do this new extension across the way, It's not just for us.
Right.
It's for other shows. Like I said, the Cowboy show is 1.5 million.
Well, and they're talking about Las Vegas is a city objective is to be able to host 2 major shows simultaneously on an ongoing basis. So today, if you take up half or 3/4 of this, it's kind of hard for another show to kind of slide in. With the way this is being designed, you can now do 2 big shows simultaneously at the same time in the city. So the ability, I couldn't imagine 2 CESs. That would be like absolutely crazy.
Well, even when the Cowboy show is, people, they not only do every hotel, people are driving in from hundreds of miles.
People bring their RVs or whatever, right? Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Tim Bajarin, talking about what's going on here at CES. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our conversation with Tim Bajarin, talking about what we're seeing here at CES. So one of the things, I don't know, I'm still seeing it as I walk around. I'm interested in your feedback on this, is AI everything. You cannot go into a booth that doesn't have some claim of AI.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of a catch-all term.
Right.
Okay, let's be clear. When you actually drill down with some of these guys and ask them to explain what is AI of the product, it's actually just some fundamental smart things that are based on what if that has driven the PC industry from the beginning, right? Now, to be fair, they are doing some really unique things in artificial intelligence, in things like smart thermostats, we talked about earlier, smart cars. But I think if you really look where we are right now, going into this next decade, I think that AI will be something that permeates pretty much everything that is electronic. AI used at the edge, AI used at servers, because we really need smarter devices to work within what we do. Part of the reason is, as humans, we're hard to predict, and so you really need AI in its fullest sense to keep up with us.
Right.
To be right,
exactly.
To be really fair. So yeah, AI is pretty much everywhere. Another thing that I sense at this particular show, when you talk about AI, is the fact that a lot of the companies just don't really understand what AI is.
Right.
They use it in a very loose term, and I think that the part of the reason they do it is because in the future, if you don't have your device with some form of AI, you're not a player at all.
Right. So it's almost like it's a punch list for a feature set that I have to have, otherwise I don't qualify.
Right.
Or I won't get considered.
Right. One of the things that goes well beyond what I believe is and what we're seeing here, because these are really just AI connected to devices, smart TVs, smart toilets, whatever, right? But I think that, and I've been writing a series for Forbes on looking back what happened in the last 10 years and then looking forward, predicting kind of what that's going to look like in the next 10 years. And I interviewed Michael Dell for that piece. I did Lisa Su from AMD for this piece. And I'm doing 2 very big CEOs I'll interview in the next 2 months to do another two pieces. But all of them, of course, talk about AI, right? The good news is Michael Dell understands what AI is. Lisa Su understands, and Mark Papermaster from AMD, they understand what AI is. And the 2 other CEOs I'm going to talk to clearly are going to understand that. But what I've interjected to some of these guys is that AI without governing rules is going to be one of the bigger problems going into this decade, and more specifically around ethics.
Right.
And so I've been really encouraging our customers, which are the big PC guys, semiconductor guys, and other industry players, that when they're crafting an AI strategy, you can't look at it in just the context of the role it plays as it relates to a product or a service. But and what I've in one particular client's position. I've just told him, I believe you need to set up an AI ethics board.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be one of the big trends, especially by the end of the decade, that the GMs of the world, the General Electrics of the world, all of these guys are going to be faced with ethical issues that they better have answers for.
Right.
And if they don't, I'm telling you, not only U.S. government, but their customers are going to come back at them.
Well, and in fact, I've been writing and doing a whole podcast series over the last year on what ethical innovation. If you look at, for instance, how many research studies have had to be retracted, everything from healthcare to a whole variety of research studies where people manipulated the data and then got caught and had to retract studies, and then people based decisions on those studies. And then you do AI, particularly in the case of certain forms of AI where you can't audit how the decision is made. And then you have to worry about bias of the training data. The bias of the training data will steer the answer, right? And we've seen this in some image recognition where the training data was all old white guys, photographs, and then all of a sudden now you're trying to do image recognition and the systems are failing on ethnicity. It can't determine people. So you have a whole variety of risk here. And I think you're right. I think many of the CEOs and many of the organizations are not thinking about this. And you're going to have one that's going to have a big blow up. But at that point, you're almost a little too late because it's one of those things where it doesn't react well to trying to slap it on after the effect because you've built all this AI capability. And if you don't think about it on the front side, the downside that you're going to experience because of bad issues in structuring the AI can be very disastrous to reputation. It could be disastrous from a legal liability issue. It could be
it could bury a company.
Yeah, you can put somebody out of business.
Company, if they don't deal with this, they could bury them.
I'm there with you. You talked about some of the work you interviewing over at AMD. Man, talk about a company that has just come around. Man, they are on fire.
Yeah. Well, and again, I've covered AMD for 30 years. This is the best leadership team I've ever seen inside there. And to be fair, the guy that they brought in at the end of the last decade, Rory Reed, did a wonderful job taking care of their debt.
Right. He was cleaning up the books.
That's what his job was.
Getting their balance sheet back in shape.
But he was not a technologist,
right.
And he admitted it. And I worked closely with him on some of these projects in those days. But the technical genius was always Lisa Su, and then he brought in Mark Papermaster towards the end of his CEO turn, and you married the two of those guys at the technical level, and you got two of the most brilliant engineers we have in the industry.
Well, the nice thing I also like about them is you don't have sometimes in the Valley you get the ego problem. The two of them don't have the ego issue that you typically run into.
Not at all.
With some of these people who think that they've got to be the smartest people in the room.
And she knows where her limits are. He knows where his limits
exactly.
are. But they complement each other.
They have great reputation in the Valley. Yeah. Just absolutely, particularly as a team.
Yeah, but I will tell you that there is an issue right now that is going to really help AMD for the next year and a half, and that's Intel has a major supply problem. And Intel cannot deliver the type of high-performance, high-powered chips at the moment. So all of the vendors that we talk to are just basically saying that this next year, we may be doing some big switches to AMD.
Right. Let's pause that. We're going to come back right after the break because I want to talk more about this because Intel and where they're at and where the whole Valley issue is on silicon. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to our conversation with Tim Bajarin. So, Tim, we were talking before we went to the last break around, you're saying the supply issue for high-performance compute. what's driving the demand for high performance compute
Well,
first?
it's not only high performance, but it's even standard computing.
Right.
Is that Intel, and it is very well known that the TSMC and other of the big manufacturers of processors were able to, in the last 12 to 18 months, go down to 7 nanometer, right? And of course, when you go from 14 to 10 to 7, each one gives you greater improvement of capabilities, speeds, etc.
Right.
And so, from AMD's standpoint, they just rode the TSMC train. They helped actually with the transition from what was then 14 to 10 and then to most recently 7. Where Intel, and we still don't quite understand what happened, but they had real trouble moving from 14 to 10. And they're just barely getting at the 10 segment now.
And everybody's moving on to 7.
In the process of trying to make that transition, they have not been able to keep up with the demand. So in one sense, this is really good for Intel because you can see whether there's a great deal of interest in Intel product, but Intel cannot deliver in the short term. We are not clear yet on how long it'll take for Intel to actually catch up, but in the short term, AMD looks like the one that'll have the greatest benefit from it because AMD can deliver pretty much anything that the big PC guys want. But this brings up another big issue, is that if you actually look at the existing semiconductor manufacturers, Samsung, TSMC, Global Foundries, etc., they're all of a sudden in a resurgence. Because now we're not just talking about 100 million PCs or 200 million PCs, 300 million PCs, or 1 or 2 billion smartphones. We're not talking about the potential of 1 trillion devices connected, of which all of them have to have some form of a semiconductor.
Right.
Some of them can be very, very low level.
Right, it's very low cost. The cost model is a little different than
very different
servers going down to.
But you still have to make them.
Yep, exactly.
Right? So all of a sudden, the TSMCs are just almost overwhelmed. The Samsung, who does contract manufacturing, they're almost overwhelmed. They still have capacity, but the situation right now is. AMD is picking up some of the slack for the big PC companies, which is really good for AMD. And what I suspect will happen is when you have some of the bigger companies commit to AMD and do all the work so that AMD parts fit, they might not go back to Intel.
Right. Well, I mean, if you remember, was it 08, 09, there was this big swing to AMD because one price point, you could tier your product line. But you're right though. Once you make that move and you do all that motherboard engineering, and you do component quals and all those issues for manufacturability, that's expensive. You're not going to pick up and just plop back to the other side. Question: something that has been kind of always been a discussion, on the silicon side is the pace of Moore's law. Now I've argued for years that I think, look. Intel, AMD, the really smart engineers will figure out how to drive that. But what a lot of people may not be sensitive to is the fact that as you get down into these smaller sizes, one, it's a big investment cost. That investment cost in fab facilities starts to get pretty expensive. So the question is Moore's Law really a science issue? Or is it ability to invest billions of dollars into manufacturing facilities to take the next big step?
It's a little bit of both. But at this stage of the game, because I remember at a time having discussions with Intel where they were freaking out because a fab would cost $1 or $2 billion, right?
Right now it's
Well, it's up between 7 to 10.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it's going to double again.
Yeah, absolutely, and that just doesn't happen quickly. And those kind of capital expenses, you got to really think about.
Right.
And there was a period in time where Intel actually did not have all their lines going simultaneously, and so they did some contract manufacturing themselves. Nowadays, their lines are basically going constantly, and so they're back up to that capability. except for the fact that the manufacturing process, in this case 10 nanometer, is not up to par on all of the lines yet. And if I'm Dell or HP or anybody, I want chips on the 10 nanometer side.
Right. Yeah. Well, and again, you talk about, the cost of that fab. So if Intel all of a sudden or Global Foundry says, something, I'm going to wait a year before I start that new fab, right? I'm going to, drive a little bit more margin over what I got because I've got plenty of demand. I can meet that demand. So I'm going to maybe, slightly delay that capital investment so I can get a higher return on my current investment. All of a sudden you start seeing the linearity of speed starts to slow down because now it's a longer cycle gap between each generation, and that starts having other kinds of impact. But you're back to your point though on we're talking about 1 trillion devices, all with little IoT devices with little sensors. That could use up a lot of fab capacity,
and they know that.
Right.
But at the same time, the money is in the more powerful chipsets.
Right. Yeah, what you pay for a server chipset versus what you pay for a PC chipset versus what you pay for
a sensor.
Or sensor, completely different models.
And again, in this decade, that'll get flushed out. But at this stage of the game, it's not exactly clear, for example, who will build the next big fab, knowing that a lot of those would be lower cost chips.
Right.
Now, the typical is, we'll make it up in volume. They may be right if you're talking about 1 trillion devices a year, but the economics there, nobody can, at this stage, I don't think any of us can figure out the economics of it.
Right, yeah. So one of the things I know you track pretty closely, Creative Strategies, and I know you work with a bunch of the PC industry. It's where I came from. There's always been this, the death knell of PCs, the prediction that, PCs are going to go away. But we're seeing this resurgence. We're seeing growth in the laptop space specifically.
Laptop specifically, one big reason is that, number one, we're able to deliver a lot more power in lower energy packages.
Yeah.
And so I was at the Samsung launch the other night of this new Chromebook that is like, half an inch thick. Yet it'll still get 10, 12 hours of battery life. And it's one of the most, it's just amazing little device.
Right. Well, and everybody always comments like, oh, the battery technology is getting good. I'm like, not really. It's everything else. The display, the processor, the memory.
All the stuff. Yeah. Anyway, my point is that there really is, it's coming down to the PC and productivity. Those who need who use them for productivity, fundamentally just still go with a PC. That's not changing.
Yeah.
And even the younger generations who are using Chromebooks in schools, it's the same thing.
Right.
But we are seeing a resurgence. We'll never be back at the 380, 400 million PCs a year. We're settled somewhere between 260 and 280, and I think it'll stay there pretty much. That. Mm-hmm. The bigger question, and we can get into this afterwards, is this in the next segment, is the fact that we have a new technology coming this year, starting this year, that will impact the PC industry, and that is folding displays.
Mm-hmm.
And folding displays could redefine the concept of a PC. That's where the big things become interesting.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion, right? Samsung came out with the foldable display, then ended up having to pull it back, because of durability. I mean, it's a tough material science challenge.
Yeah, but when you go on the show floor here and look at Royale, for example, the new ones that they did, you look at LG. I was just looking at Sharp's flexible display that rolls down. Right. What I see now is all of the big players are saying foldable is the next big shift in a major component that we use in our systems. Mm-hmm. And so BOE, for example, is tripling the research and what they're doing in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right? Because at HP, we were doing a bunch of
I remember that.
Foldable, rollable displays, and I still have my samples that I pull out and show people because I do believe, given form factor size and your ability to get that cost down, can have a huge impact on the availability of screen real estate to be thought differently. So we'll continue this conversation when we come back from this quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. So, Tim, let's continue our conversation. We were talking, about where the PC's going, but you got into the foldable displays, and I've been a long time fan of foldables. For those of you listening, you can go out to YouTube and you can search for Phil McKinney foldable, and there's all kinds of videos of me showing and demonstrating those back in like 2009, 2010, 2011 timeframe. Why do you think people are so interested in it? Bob O'Donnell, who partners with you on the Tech Minions podcast, I know is a huge fan of foldables.
Well, I think there's one big reason that I think it's interesting is that for the last maybe 15, 20 years or so, when we talk about components going into PCs, it's mostly been around the innovation in speeds and feeds, somewhat in the design in the sense of thinner, lighter, not that much change in battery chemistry. And I think that the PC industry itself is looking for a component that might give them a big boost. So all of them, I mean, literally all the PC guys, all the smartphone guys are all saying, we think that some form factor that integrates a foldable screen in one form or another could be the exact thing that could rejuvenate or refresh our particular businesses that kind of I wouldn't say stagnated, but they've stabilized.
Well, I get that, because everybody's looking for some form of market differentiation. They want to have something new that's clever. Why do you think consumers, though, would be interested in it? What does it give the consumers?
So that's actually the big question that we don't have an answer to.
Right.
Because when I talk to the vendors who are doing this, my first big question is what is the business case and value proposition? So the value proposition starts with if you so I played, of course, with multiple foldable smartphones, and the Samsung one, of course, is the one that's been out. They've sold over 1 million already. So it is a product that has interest, but it's the concept of taking something that's small and then making it bigger, so that now instead of having a half of a screen, you're getting a full screen and you're going up to like 9 inches, right? In fact, Dell today just introduced something in that case, in that particular category. And we expect other vendors to do things anywhere from 9 to 13 inches.
Oh, really?
When you fold out. Not necessarily
finish size, meaning it's
not just
4.5 going to 9.
Right, not just smartphones, but laptops. So yesterday, Lenovo introduced their official foldable, and I've gotten to play with that quite a bit, actually, both here and in China. And it's a fascinating idea because that device does two things if it's used properly, but it gives you the split screen as well. So you're now dealing with in the shorter term, I think it's like 9 inches folded. You open it up and it's like 13 inches. So it's smaller to carry around.
Right.
And then at the same time, you use that as a new means for it could be used as a tablet. It could be used as a dual screen PC, let's say.
Right.
And it's lighter. It's not thinner by any means, but it's lighter. And it's easier to carry around.
Yep.
Smartphone's the same. When you look at the Samsung thing, it folds in half pretty thinly, but you open it up and now you've got almost a 9-inch screen. And it's really kind of interesting to play with that. Interestingly, though, I actually think in the smartphone space, Motorola's Razr, which
the new one?
Yeah, which is foldable.
I've received more phone calls on that for that phone from people who are just begging, people are like, do you know anybody? Can I get my hands on one? I'm like, dude, I've been out of that business for a long time.
So we, at least I in our research, is leaning towards the fact that we think that may be the one that's the volume device.
Is it really foldable, or is it two with a hinge?
No,
it's truly one continuous surface.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I've played with it in China.
I've just seen the pictures. I haven't
I played with it in China a month ago.
And some people say foldables, but it's really two displays hinged.
So if you remember the StarTAC,
yep,
right? Mm-hmm. It's basically the same idea. It's just that everything's a screen.
Right. So everything, including what normally would be the keyboard on the lower half of the flip.
It's a touch screen.
So it's just everything is just.
Yeah, and the Motorola version is really done well. You can't see the creases. I mean, it's not ready for production yet. I don't think they're going to start producing until middle of the year, etc. But they've surprisingly figured out how to deal with. Again, the screen itself, when you open it up, is like 6 inches, so it's not giant.
Wow!
But it fits in your
think
pocket
you're right.
different.
I think that's going to be
Yeah, we think that is. And then when you look at the Lenovo laptop that was just introduced, that also is really interesting because you're at a 9-inch going to 13-inch diagonally. Mm-hmm. And the only odd part about that one is how you have to carry a separate keyboard. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is a virtual keyboard. But in a true productivity standpoint, you really want another keyboard.
Right. So, hey, Tim, thanks for taking the time. I know a lot of people, trying to grab a hold of you while they're here at the show, and you've got clients you need to meet with, and I do appreciate you taking the time and joining us here in the mobile studio and giving us some of your early insights. So, if people want to track what you're doing and what your team is doing, where's the best place they can find you?
At Bajarin on Twitter.
Right.
And I think it's Tim Bajarin on LinkedIn.
Okay.
We post a lot on that.
And you've also got your Forbes column.
Well, I write for Forbes and Fast Company.
Right.
So those will come up periodically.
Right.
And then, of course, we have Techpinions.
Techpinions.
Which is our, it's not really our company because Bob writes for it, etc. Right. But it's a very interesting little blog, and it's done really well.
Yeah. In fact, I would encourage you to check out TechPinions. We'll put links in the show notes so people can keep up with what you're doing.
Great.
And hope you have a great rest of the time here at CES.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, for listeners, we're at Las Vegas. We're at the Consumer Electronics Show. As normal, we will have a series of guests. So you want to check out that entire series to hear what's going on, what's coming down the line for great innovations that you may be interested in or may spark your own ideas. So we'll be back with you next week. Bye-bye.